If you like our short stories, please like, comment and subscribe for more. Everyone at Hogwarts agreed on one thing. Rubeus Hagrid was harmless. He was too large to be threatening, too clumsy to be clever, too openly emotional to be dangerous. Students laughed when he spilled tea on himself. Professors sighed when he forgot protocol. Even fearsome creatures seemed calmer around him, as if they recognized something soft and familiar in his presence. That was the story everyone told themselves. On the night it began to unravel, the castle slept beneath a thin veil of fog, the kind that softened torchlight and turned corridors into tunnels of gold and shadow. The forbidden forest loomed beyond the grounds, black and silent, its tree-line unmoving in the still air. Hagrid walked alone, lantern swinging gently at his side. He knew every route beneath his boots. Every slope. Every place where the forest dipped or rose. He did not hurry. The forest was not something to rush through. It was something to listen to. A sound reached him, soft, brief, and wrong. Not a howl. Not the cry of a creature. A human voice. Hagrid stopped. The lantern stilled. The flame inside it flickered once, then steadied. He tilted his head, listening with an expression that, to anyone watching, might have looked like concern. "Now then," he murmured, almost fondly. "That won't do." The voice came again. A whisper this time. A student's whisper. Hagrid turned from the path and stepped between the trees. Earlier that evening, Callum Price had made a mistake. It was not a dramatic mistake. There was no shouting, no dare issued by friends, no thrill-seeking plan. Callum had simply followed the wrong trail while returning from the greenhouses, distracted by thoughts of an unfinished essay and the faint glow of something moving among the trees. He knew the rules. Everyone did. The forbidden forest was forbidden. But rules felt different when no one was watching. Now, standing ankle-deep in damp leaves, Callum realized how quiet it was. The sounds of the castle, laughter, footsteps, distant conversation, had vanished completely. The trees around him were too close, their branches interlocking overhead like fingers. "Hello?" he called, hating the way his voice trembled. Something shifted ahead. Callum took a step back. His foot caught on a root, and he stumbled, barely keeping himself upright. His heart pounded hard enough to hurt. Then the lantern light appeared. Warm. Steady. Human. Relief crashed through him so fast his knees nearly gave out. "Hagrid," he said, laughing shakily. "Thank Merlin, I got turned around. I didn't mean to." Hagrid emerged from the trees, his massive silhouette resolving into familiar shapes, the heavy coat, the tangled beard, the crossbow slung over his shoulder. His face was calm, almost gentle. "Lost, are ye?" Hagrid said. Callum nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I was just heading back and, happens," Hagrid said. "Forest plays tricks sometimes." He stepped closer, lantern lifting to illuminate Callum's face. The boy noticed, distantly, that Hagrid's eyes were sharper than usual. Focused. As if measuring something invisible. "You're lucky I found ye," Hagrid continued. "Not safe out air for students." "I know," Callum said. "I'm really sorry." Hagrid smiled. It was not a cruel smile. Not even an unfriendly one. It was the same smile Callum had seen dozens of times before, soft, reassuring, full of quiet warmth. "Come on, then," Hagrid said. "I'll take ye back." He turned and began walking. Callum followed. They went deeper into the forest. At first, Callum didn't notice. The path was narrow, winding. Trees blocked any sense of direction. But after several minutes, unease crept back in. Callum said carefully. "Isn't the castle the other way?" Hagrid didn't stop walking. "Aye," he said. Roundabout ways safer. Safer from what? Hagrid paused. The forest seemed to lean in. From things that don't like being disturbed, Hagrid said. He turned. For the first time, Callum saw something unfamiliar in his face, not anger, not malice, but certainty. Deep. Unquestionable. You ever wonder, Hagrid asked softly, why the forest's forbidden? Callum swallowed. Because it's dangerous. Hagrid chuckled, low and quiet. No, he said. Because it remembers. A sound echoed nearby. Heavy. Deliberate. Not approaching, but present. Callum's breath hitched. Hagrid? Easy, Hagrid said, lifting a massive hand, not to protect, but to still him. They're just curious. They? Hagrid looked past him, into the darkness. They don't get many chances anymore, he said. World's changin'. Less patience for old things. The lantern light dimmed slightly. Hagrid, Callum whispered, panic breaking through. Please. I want to go back. Hagrid knelt, bringing his face level with the boys. You'll be remembered, he said. That's more than most get. The forest moved. The lantern fell. And somewhere beyond the trees, Hogwarts slept on. Morning at Hogwarts always arrived the same way. Owls skimmed past the towers like silent thoughts. Sunlight spilled through high windows and turned dust into drifting gold. Plates filled themselves. Voices rose. Shoes scraped stone floors. Life continued, as if the castle were a living thing that could not imagine itself breaking. At the Ravenclaw table, a seat remained empty. At first, it barely registered. Students missed breakfast all the time. Overslept. Skipped. Showed up late with ink-stained fingers and excuses. Nobody panicked over an empty chair. But Callum Price wasn't the kind of boy who missed meals. He was the kind who arrived early, sat in the same place, and asked quiet questions about everything. He was the kind who corrected people gently, like he was afraid to embarrass them. He was the kind who always said thank you to house elves when he thought no one was looking. His friend Mira Hensley noticed immediately. Mira had slid into her usual seat, taken one bite of toast, and looked up, expecting to see Callum already there, already flipping through a book, already halfway through a sentence. Instead there was only the empty space. Callum's goblet sat untouched. His napkin lay folded, still neat from yesterday. Mira stared at it longer than she meant to. He'll come in any second, she told herself. He didn't. The minutes passed. Breakfast ended. Students began to rise. Mira felt a cold tightness settle in her ribs. Callum wasn't missing breakfast. Callum was missing. By the time first period began, it was no longer a private worry. A prefect asked around. A head of house checked dormitories. A teacher mentioned Callum's absence with mild irritation that shifted, slowly, into concern. Students in Ravenclaw whispered. Someone in Hufflepuff claimed they'd seen him last night near the greenhouses. Someone else insisted he'd been in the library. Someone else swore he'd gone to bed early. Mira kept replaying her last conversation with him. Callum had been distracted. He'd mentioned fog. He'd said he thought he saw something moving beyond the grounds, like a light between trees. Mira had laughed and told him he was reading too much. Now she couldn't remember if he'd laughed back. At lunch, Professor McGonagall stood at the head of the Great Hall. The room quieted in a way that felt unnatural, like the castle was holding its breath. Ravenclaws, McGonagall said, crisp and controlled, if any of you have seen Callum Price since last evening, you are to report it immediately. Mira felt heat rise behind her eyes. Across the hall, Hagrid stood near the staff table. He looked bigger than usual in the stillness. His face was drawn, his brow furrowed. He looked worried. That made Myra's stomach twist. It was easier when adults were calm. When they were sure. When they knew what to do. Hagrid looked like someone who knew exactly what had happened and didn't like it. McGonagall continued, "We will be conducting a search of the grounds." Then her gaze sharpened. "And let me be perfectly clear. No student is to leave the castle. Not for any reason." A murmur passed through the great hall. Myra's breath caught when she saw Dumbledore rise from his seat. His expression was gentle, almost regretful. "As Professor McGonagall has said," Dumbledore added, "we will find Callum. Hogwarts takes care of its own." The way he said it sounded like a promise. The way his eyes did not move toward Hagrid sounded like something else. The search began in the late afternoon. Teachers formed lines. Auras were not called. Parents were not informed yet. The school treated it like a problem that could still be solved quietly. It felt like an argument the castle was having with reality. Mira watched from a corridor window as staff and older students crossed the grounds, spreading out like ink on parchment. Snow had not yet fallen, but the air held that sharp winter edge. The fog from the night before lingered low near the trees. Hagrid stood at the front of the group, lantern in hand again, as if it belonged there. Professors deferred to him without thinking. Of course they did. He was the gamekeeper. Keeper of keys. The one who knew the forest's moods and trails and dangers. The one who had saved students from trouble more times than anyone could count. When the search reached the edge of the forbidden forest, McGonagall's voice carried across the grass. "We will not enter," she said. Hagrid turned slowly. "If the boy went in," he said, "then that's where he'll be." McGonagall's lips tightened. "And if we lose more students because of it?" Hagrid's eyes flicked toward the trees. Just for a moment. Then he looked back at McGonagall with something that could have been frustration. Or disappointment. "Professor," he said, quieter now, "I won't let that happen." Dumbledore stepped forward. His voice was soft, but it changed everything. "Hagrid," he said, "take 2 staff members. No students." Hagrid nodded instantly, like a dog hearing a familiar command. Mira watched him step into the trees with Professor Sprout and Professor Flitwick behind him. The branches swallowed them. The lantern glow became a floating ember, then vanished. Her hands were shaking. She tried to tell herself it would be fine. Hagrid would bring him back. That's what Hagrid did. The search lasted hours. As the sun sank, the torches around the grounds flared brighter. Students were herded indoors. Doors were locked. The castle became a cage built out of safety and fear. Mira lingered in a hallway until a prefect told her to move along. She drifted toward the library instead. She didn't know why, only that the silence there felt more honest than the great hall's forced normalcy. Madame Pince eyed her suspiciously but allowed her in. Mira walked between tall shelves, trailing her fingers along spines until she reached the section on Hogwarts history. She didn't have a plan. She only had a feeling, one she hated, like the castle was trying to show her something if she looked in the right place. She pulled an old book free. Dust puffed into the air. Hogwarts, a record, the title read. Mira opened it, eyes scanning page after page of dates and names and events. Most of it was ordinary. Dueling club bans. Potion accidents. Quidditch injuries. Then she found a small entry in the margins, written in tidy ink that wasn't part of the original text. It was a list. Not a formal list. Not titled. Just names. And beside each name, a single word. Missing. Myra's throat went dry. She leaned closer, reading. The date stretched back farther than she expected. Decades. Some names were half-faded, as if the ink had fought to remain on the page. She recognized one surname from a portrait in the corridor. Another from an old trophy case. Students who should have been remembered for achievements, not absence. Mira turned the page slowly. The list continued. Her fingers trembled as she traced one entry. And there, written in the same careful hand, was a date. A date from last year. A missing student she had never heard anyone mention. Mira shut the book too quickly. The sound was loud in the hush of the library. Madame Pince glared at her over the rim of her spectacles. Mira forced herself to breathe quietly, then opened the book again, more carefully this time. At the bottom of the page, beneath the list, someone had written a sentence. Not a warning. Not a plea. A note. If you are reading this, it means the school is still pretending it's new. Mira's heart pounded. Footsteps sounded in the corridor outside the library. Heavy footsteps. She froze. The door creaked. Hagrid stepped inside. His lantern was unlit now, hanging at his side like a weight. His coat was damp at the edges. Bits of leaf clung to his boots. He looked exhausted. He also looked calm. Hagrid's eyes found Mira almost immediately. Not with surprise. With recognition. As if he'd expected her to be there. "Evening, Mira," he said gently. "Library's a funny place to be right now." Mira swallowed, trying to hide the book with her hands. "Did you find him?" she asked, and hated how small her voice sounded. Hagrid's face softened. He walked closer, slow and careful, like he didn't want to startle her. "We found signs," he said. "Footprints. Drag marks. Looked like he wandered too far in." Mira's stomach lurched. "Drag marks?" she repeated. Hagrid nodded. "Forest can be cruel," he said quietly. "But it ain't cruel for no reason." His gaze dropped to the book beneath Mira's hands. For a moment, the gentle giant looked very still. Very patient. "Ye shouldn't go diggin' in old things," Hagrid said, voice still warm. "Old things can bite." Mira's mouth went dry. She wanted to stand. She couldn't. Hagrid's smile returned, soft as ever. But this time, Mira noticed something. His smile was perfectly timed. Like a tool. "Come on," he said, voice kind enough to make her doubt herself. "Let's get ye back to your common room. It's been a long day." Mira nodded slowly, lifting the book as if she meant to return it. Her fingers slipped a small scrap of parchment from the inside cover without Hagrid seeing. Or without him reacting. As she followed him out, the scrap burned against her palm. And behind them, the book remained on the shelf, quiet, dusty, and waiting for the next person brave enough to notice the pattern. The announcement came at breakfast. It always did. Professor McGonagall stood once more at the front of the great hall, her posture rigid, her mouth drawn into a thin, controlled line. The room quieted faster than it had the day before. No one wanted to be the last voice still speaking when the truth, or something pretending to be it, arrived. Mira sat rigid at the Ravenclaw table, the scrap of parchment hidden deep in her pocket like a second heartbeat. "Students," McGonagall said, "it is with great regret that we must inform you that Callum Price has been declared lost." The word struck harder than dead would have. Lost implied uncertainty. Implied hope that would never quite die, even as it poisoned everything around it. "The evidence suggests," McGonagall continued, "that Callum wandered into the Forbidden Forest and suffered a fatal encounter with a magical creature." A collective breath released across the hall. Some students cried softly. Others stared down at their plates. A few whispered hurried prayers to gods they weren't sure they believed in. Mira felt cold. "There will be no further searches," McGonagall said. "The forest is unstable, and we will not risk additional lives." Her gaze swept the room. Let this serve as a reminder. The rules exist to protect you. At the staff table, Hagrid bowed his head. He looked devastated. Several students glanced at him with sympathy. Someone sniffed loudly near the Hufflepuff table. Even Mira felt the old instinct tug at her, the desire to believe in the grief of someone everyone trusted. But grief, she realized, could be performed. Dumbledore rose slowly. The loss of a student is a tragedy, he said softly. But tragedy does not define us. How we respond does. His eyes lingered on the Ravenclaw table for just a moment too long. We will honor Callum's memory, he continued. And we will move forward. The phrase settled like a lid being closed. Classes resumed. That was the strangest part. Charms lessons. Transfiguration essays. Quidditch practice. The castle insisted on normalcy, wrapping routine around grief like bandages over a wound that no one intended to reopen. Mira went through the motions. She answered questions automatically. She took notes she didn't remember writing. Her thoughts stayed fixed on the scrap of parchment burning against her leg. She didn't read it until that night. The Ravenclaw common room was quieter than usual, conversations muted and short-lived. Mira waited until her dormitory emptied, until the curtains around her bed felt like walls instead of fabric. Only then did she pull the scrap free. The handwriting was tight and precise, the letters small. If you found the list, it means someone else is missing. Mira's breath caught. You will be told it was an accident. It always is. Her hands trembled as she read on. Do not confront anyone. Especially not him. The forest is not wild. It is organized. And he is the one who organizes it. Mira swallowed hard. At the bottom of the parchment, a single line had been underlined twice. If you want proof, go where the forest bends inward. There was no signature. No name. Just certainty. Mira didn't sleep. The phrase repeated itself in her mind, where the forest bends inward. By morning, she had convinced herself it was madness. A cruel prank. The desperate writing of someone who had lost too much and needed someone to blame. And yet, at breakfast, she watched Hagrid laugh softly with a group of first years, showing them how to butter toast without tearing it. She watched professors smile at him with the familiarity of long habit. She watched him look exactly like the man everyone trusted. Then she noticed something else. When Hagrid moved across the great hall, his gaze flicked toward the doors. Toward the grounds. Toward the forest. Always. The phrase made sense once Mira allowed herself to look. From the astronomy tower, the forbidden forest spread out like a dark sea. Its edges were uneven, natural, chaotic, except for one place. There, not far from the path Hagrid used most often, the trees curved inward. Not sharply. Not obviously. Just enough to form a shallow crescent. A place where sound might be trapped. A place where things could disappear. Mira stared at it until her eyes ached. That evening, she made a decision she knew she would regret. She waited until curfew. Until the corridors emptied and the castle's watchful stillness settled in. She slipped from Ravenclaw Tower beneath her cloak, moving carefully, avoiding staircases that shifted too often and portraits that liked to gossip. The grounds were cold, the grass damp beneath her shoes. Clouds drifted across the moon, turning the world silver and shadowed in slow pulses. The forest loomed closer with every step. Mira hesitated at the tree line. She thought of Callum's empty seat. Of McGonagall's careful words. Of Dumbledore's promise to move forward. She stepped inside. The forest felt different at night. Not louder. Quieter. As if it were holding its breath. Mira moved slowly, counting her steps, following the curve she had memorized from above. Branches brushed her cloak. Roots twisted beneath her feet like sleeping animals. Then she felt it. A subtle shift in the air. The trees ahead curved inward, their trunks leaning just enough to form a shallow bowl. The ground dipped slightly, leaves pressed flat as if by repeated use. This was not a place stumbled upon. This was a place returned to. Myra's heart pounded as she crouched, brushing leaves aside. The soil beneath was dark and compacted. Footprints overlapped each other, boots, many of them large. Too large to belong to students. She followed the trail to the center of the clearing. There, half hidden beneath a tangle of roots, was something pale. Myra's breath caught as she knelt. It was a fragment of cloth. Hogwarts robes. Ravenclaw blue. Her hands shook as she lifted it. The fabric was torn, edges ragged. Dark stains marked one side, old and dry. Myra's stomach twisted. She heard a sound behind her. Not a branch snapping. Footsteps. Heavy. Familiar. She froze. The lantern light bloomed between the trees, warm and steady, just as it had the night Callum disappeared. "Hoped ye wouldn't come out 'ere alone," Hagrid said gently. Mira turned slowly. He stood at the edge of the clearing, lantern raised, his massive frame filling the gap between the trees. His expression was not angry. It was disappointed. "Curiosity's a dangerous thing," Hagrid continued. "Especially when it's pointed in the wrong direction." Mira clutched the cloth to her chest. "Whose is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking despite her effort. Hagrid's eyes dropped to the fabric. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed. "Someone who didn't listen," he said quietly. The forest shifted. Not closer. Not farther. Just aware. "You should come back," Hagrid said, extending a hand. "Before this gets worse." Mira stared at him, lantern light reflecting in her eyes. She realized, with a clarity that terrified her, that this place was not where the crimes happened. It was where they were prepared. And Hagrid was not afraid she had found it. He was only concerned she might not understand it yet. Hagrid did not force her. That was the first thing Mira noticed. He did not grab her wrist or block her path. He did not raise his voice or threaten her with the forest that watched from every direction. He simply stood there, lantern held low, as if the choice were entirely hers. "Yeah, shiverin'," he said quietly. "Cold gets into the bones out here." Mira tightened her grip on the torn robe. "You knew this place existed." You use it." The honesty unsettled her more than denial would have. "Why?" she demanded. "Why here? Why students?" Hagrid's shoulders rose and fell in a slow breath. He turned, gesturing for her to follow, not deeper into the forest, but along the curve of the clearing. Against her better judgment, Mira stepped after him. Something told her running would only make things worse. "Walk with me," Hagrid said. "It's easier to explain when you're moving." They moved along the edge of the bowl-shaped clearing. As they walked, Mira noticed details she hadn't before. Carved marks on tree trunks. Stones arranged in subtle lines. Symbols half buried beneath leaves, worn smooth by time and weather. This wasn't a crime scene. It was infrastructure. "Creatures don't think like people," Hagrid began. "They don't understand rules written in books or walls built out of stone. They understand territory. Balance. Hunger." Myra's jaw tightened. "That doesn't explain. Hear me out," Hagrid said gently. "I've spent my life listening to things most folks would rather kill than hear." He stopped beside a low ridge where the ground dipped sharply, then leveled again. The air felt heavier there. "Some creatures," he continued, "can't survive without taking. Not evil. Just old." Older than Hogwarts. Older than the idea that the world belongs to humans. Mira stared at him. So you feed them? Hagrid looked at her then, really looked at her. Yes, he said. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. You murder students, Mira whispered. Hagrid shook his head. No. I choose. She laughed, sharp and broken. That's worse. Is it? Hagrid asked. Tell me, Mira, how many students do you think would have died if I hadn't learned how to keep things satisfied? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. You think the forest's dangerous because it's wild, Hagrid said. It's dangerous because it's restrained. Every creature out here knows where it can go. Where it can't. What it's allowed to take. He pointed toward the darkness beyond the clearing. That line keeps hundreds safe. Myra's voice trembled. And the ones it doesn't? Hagrid's gaze softened. They're remembered by the forest. That's not comfort. No, he agreed. It's truth. They walked farther. The lantern light revealed a narrow passage between trees, branches woven deliberately to hide what lay beyond. Mira felt dread coil tighter with every step. The passage opened into a smaller clearing. There were no bones. No blood. Only stones. Flat stones, arranged in a careful circle. At the center, a shallow depression in the earth, smooth from use. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain after lightning. Mira felt her knees weaken. This is where you, she began. No, Hagrid said softly. This is where I stop things from getting worse. She stared at him. You expect me to believe that? Hagrid knelt, running his hand over the earth. Creatures leave marks. Signs. Patterns. Humans look for violence. Creatures look for ritual. Myra's stomach churned. You turned this into a system. A necessary one. Her voice broke. Callum wasn't necessary. Hagrid flinched. Just a little. Callum wandered, he said quietly. He wasn't meant to be taken. But he was. Hagrid closed his eyes. Balance doesn't care about intentions. Mira felt something inside her harden. You talk like this absolves you. Hagrid stood slowly. No. It explains me. They didn't hear the footsteps at first. A soft shuffle. Careful. Too light to be Hagrid's. Mira spun, heart hammering. An older wizard stood at the edge of the lantern's glow. His robes were worn thin at the cuffs. His hair was streaked with grey. One of his hands trembled, fingers curled unnaturally, as if they had never healed correctly. Still recruiting, are ye? The man said hoarsely. Hagrid stiffened. Elias, he said. Ye shouldn't be here. Elias laughed, the sound brittle. Funny thing to say, comin' from you. Mira stared between them. You know him. I survived him, Elias said, stepping closer. The lantern light revealed scars along his neck, faint but deliberate, like something had marked him rather than mauled him. Or at least, I survived what he arranged. Myra's breath caught. You're from the list. Elias nodded. Left for dead, they said. Accident. Beast attack. Convenient. Hagrid's voice dropped. I told Ye not to come back. And I told myself I'd never let another kid stand where I stood, Elias said, eyes flicking to Mira. Looks like I was late. The forest shifted again, uneasy. Myra's mind raced. Why didn't you tell anyone? Elias's gaze hardened. Because when I tried, Dumbledore asked me a question. Hagrid's jaw clenched. He asked me how many would die if Hagrid stopped, Elias continued. Then he thanked me for my concern and escorted me off the grounds. Mira felt the world tilt. You're lying, she whispered. Elias met her eyes. I wish I were. Silence stretched between them. Hagrid looked older suddenly. Smaller. I kept things contained, he said. I kept the castle standing. And decided who paid for it, Elias said. Hagrid turned to Mira. Now ye know, he said quietly. So here's the truth. If this comes out, the forest won't stay quiet. And more than students will die. Mira felt fear, and then something colder. Resolve. Then we find another way, she said. Hagrid's expression softened with something like pity. There isn't one, he said. Mira did not sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the circle of stones. The smooth earth at its center. The way Hagrid's voice had remained steady while he explained how students became variables in a system meant to protect everyone else. By morning, exhaustion had settled into her bones like a second skeleton. The castle felt different now. Not darker. Not crueler. Just dishonest. Hogwarts went on pretending, corridors full, staircases shifting, portraits gossiping, but Mira could feel the lie beneath it all, like rot under polished wood. Every familiar sound carried an echo of something unspoken. She watched Hagrid from a distance that day. He helped a group of second years with a blast-ended Scrooge enclosure, laughing when one of them shrieked and dropped a bucket. He handed out biscuits to a crying first year who'd broken a quill. Professors greeted him warmly, as they always had. No one saw the man Mira had walked beside in the forest. Or perhaps they had, and had learned not to look. Elias kept his distance. He did not return to the castle, not fully. He lingered at the edge of the grounds, near the old boathouse, appearing only when the light began to fade. Mira found him there just before dinner, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out across the lake. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. Neither should you, Elias replied. She hesitated, then stepped closer. We can't just let this continue. Elias exhaled slowly. I said the same thing once. And you were ignored. I was silenced, he corrected. There's a difference. Mira clenched her fists. Then we need proof. Something no one can dismiss as an accident. Elias turned to her, studying her face. Proof won't save you if the truth costs more than the lie. That's not an excuse. No, he agreed. It's a warning. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded bundle of parchment. Old. Yellowed. Covered in cramped writing. I started keeping records, he said. After I realized I wasn't the first. Mira took them with shaking hands. Dates. Names. Locations. Always the forest. Always near paths Hagrid controlled. Always followed by the same words in official reports. Accidental encounter with magical creature. Why didn't you publish this? Mira asked. Elias gave a bitter smile. Because every time someone tried to push, something else happened. A beast escaped. A ward failed. A distraction large enough to remind everyone why Hagrid was necessary. Mira's chest tightened. He's been manipulating the school. Managing it, Elias said. From the shadows? She swallowed. Then we need to catch him in the act. Elias stiffened. No. That's the only way, Mira insisted. If we can show. What? Elias snapped, suddenly fierce. A ritual? A creature feeding? Do you think they'll side with the child who broke curfew or the man who's kept them alive for decades? Mira faltered. Elias softened, rubbing his temple. I don't say this to stop you. I say it so you understand the cost. What cost? She whispered. Elias met her eyes. He will not hesitate again. That night, the forest changed. Mira felt it before she saw it. A pressure in the air. A low hum beneath the wind, like something massive shifting its weight. From the castle windows, Torchlight along the grounds flickered erratically. Students whispered about strange noises. Professors doubled patrols. A notice appeared on every common room board. All access to the grounds is temporarily restricted. Myra's pulse raced. Hagrid was tightening the leash. She slipped out anyway. The cloak felt heavier than before, as if it knew what she was risking. The forest greeted her with a silence so deep it pressed against her ears. She didn't go to the clearing. She went higher, toward a narrow ridge Elias had marked on his parchments. A place where paths crossed. Where creatures were redirected, not fed. The lantern light appeared sooner than she expected. Hagrid stepped into view, expression calm, almost sad. "Ye really should have listened," he said. Myra's heart hammered. "You're escalating." Hagrid nodded. "Because ye're pushin'. You're going to kill someone else." "I'm going to stop chaos," Hagrid replied. "Same as I always have." Mira took a step back. "People are noticing." Hagrid's gaze flicked toward the castle lights in the distance. "They notice when things go wrong. They forget when things stay quiet. You can't control this forever." "I have," he said simply. The forest answered him then. A low rumble rolled through the trees, not threatening, but alert. A warning sounded, not for Mira, but for the world beyond the woods. Hagrid lifted his lantern slightly, illuminating his face. "For the first time," he said, "ye're standin' where I stand. Knowin' what happens if I let go." Myra's voice shook, but she held his gaze. "Then maybe it's time you did." For a long moment, Hagrid said nothing. Then he lowered the lantern. "Be careful, girl," he said quietly. "Some truths don't survive daylight." He stepped back into the trees, vanishing as smoothly as he had appeared. Mira stood alone, breath shaking, realizing something with terrifying clarity. Hagrid was no longer hiding. He was daring them to act. The controlled disaster, the screams woke the castle before the bells did. They tore through the early morning quiet like something alive, sharp and panicked, echoing through stone corridors and open stairwells. Doors flew open. Students spilled into hallways half-dressed and wide-eyed. Somewhere below, glass shattered. Mira was already awake. She knew, before anyone said a word, that this was not an accident. The alarms began seconds later. Magical wards flared, painting the walls in pulses of blue and gold. Professors shouted orders. Prefects scrambled, trying to impose structure on fear. A cry rose from the courtyard. "Something's out there." Mira shoved her cloak on and ran. The grounds were chaos. Students crowded at windows while teachers formed a defensive line near the main doors. Beyond them, the lawn had been torn apart, deep gouges in the earth, scorch marks along the hedges, a stone bench shattered into rubble. At the center of it all stood a creature Mira had never seen before. It was massive, low to the ground, its hide a patchwork of scales and matted fur. Its breath steamed in the cold air, each exhale accompanied by a guttural sound that vibrated through the bones. Its eyes were bright, not wild, but searching. Confused. Afraid. Spells flashed from the staff line, carefully aimed to drive it back, not kill it. The creature recoiled, lashing out instinctively, its claws tearing through soil and stone. And then Hagrid arrived. He pushed past the line without hesitation, lantern raised, voice booming across the grounds. "Stop!" The shout cut through the chaos like a blade. The creature froze. So did the spells. Hagrid stepped forward, boots sinking into torn earth, his posture relaxed despite the danger. He spoke softly now, words Mira couldn't hear, but the creature responded immediately, lowering its head, backing away step by deliberate step. The forest stirred at the edge of the grounds. Hagrid turned slightly, lifting his free hand. The creature obeyed. It retreated toward the trees, vanishing into the shadowed tree line as if it had never been there at all. Silence followed. Then applause. Not thunderous. Not celebratory. Relieved. Students clutched each other. Professors exhaled. Someone laughed shakily. Mira felt sick. By noon, the story had been written. It spread through the castle in hushed tones and exaggerated retellings. A previously unknown beast escaped the deeper forest. Hagrid intervened before anyone was hurt. Thank Merlin he was there. Professor McGonagall praised his bravery at lunch. Dumbledore thanked him publicly, a hand resting briefly on Hagrid's shoulder. The Daily Prophet Owl arrived before dinner. Crisis resolved. Balance restored. Mira watched it all from the edge of the Great Hall, her hands clenched in her sleeves. Elias found her there, his face grim. That was deliberate, she said before he could speak. Elias nodded. He loosened the boundary. You're sure? I helped him build some of them, Elias replied quietly. Years ago. I know what happens when one is released just enough to be noticed. Myra's chest tightened. He manufactured a disaster. He staged a reminder, Elias said. Of what happens without him. Across the hall, Hagrid laughed as a group of students thanked him. He looked tired. Heroic. Necessary. Untouchable. That night, Mira snuck into the records room beneath the headmaster's office. It wasn't easy. The wards were old, layered, designed to deter curiosity more than intrusion. Elias waited outside, wand in hand, listening for footsteps. Inside, the air smelled of dust and ink and secrets that had learned to be quiet. Mira moved quickly, pulling scroll after scroll, cross-referencing dates with Elias's notes. The pattern tightened with every discovery. Each major incident at Hogwarts. Each unexplained creature sighting. Each time Hagrid's authority expanded just a little more. Always following moments of doubt. Moments when his system might have been questioned. This is proof, Mira whispered. Elias didn't answer. She turned. He was staring at a parchment pinned near the back wall. This, he said slowly, is worse. Mira stepped closer. The document was older than most, its edges brittle. At the top, written in formal script, were the words, Containment Agreement. Her breath caught. The names at the bottom made her heart pound. Albus Dumbledore. Several former heads of magical law enforcement. And one name written larger than the rest. Rubius Hagrid. This isn't just tolerated, Mira whispered. It's sanctioned. Elias nodded. With limits. Boundaries. Oversight. Mira swallowed. Which he's been ignoring. Which he's been outgrowing, Elias corrected. A sound echoed faintly through the stone. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Elias's eyes widened. He knows. The door creaked. Hagrid filled the doorway, lantern unlit but present, his silhouette blocking the corridor beyond. I was hoping Ye wouldn't come in air, he said calmly. Mira held up the agreement. You broke it. Hagrid's expression darkened, not with anger, but with something like regret. Those rules were written by people who don't live with the consequences, he said. They're comfortable letting things rot slow, as long as it ain't visible. You unleashed that creature, Mira said. On purpose. Hagrid nodded once. And no one died. That doesn't make it right. No, he agreed. It makes it effective. Elias stepped forward. You're crossing lines, Hagrid. Hagrid looked at him sadly. You crossed yours the day Ye came back. The air grew heavy. I won't let this go on, Mira said, voice shaking but firm. I'll tell them. All of it. Hagrid studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke softly. Then the forest will answer. The lantern flared to life in his hand. And it won't be gentle next time. He stepped back, disappearing into the corridor, leaving the threat hanging like smoke. Mira realized something then, with sick certainty. The disasters weren't warnings. They were rehearsals. The castle argued with itself. Mira felt it everywhere, in the way staircases paused too long before shifting, in portraits whispering after students passed, in the tension that clung to the air like static before a storm. Hogwarts had always been old, but now it felt uneasy, like a structure built on a fault line that had finally begun to move. Hagrid's warning echoed in her mind. Then the forest will answer. She didn't tell Elias everything she planned to do. That was the first betrayal, she knew. But fear had sharpened her instincts, and something told her that if this failed, only one of them should be exposed. She chose herself. Professor McGonagall listened without interrupting. That alone gave Mira hope. They sat in McGonagall's office as rain lashed the windows, the fire snapping sharply in the hearth. Mira laid the parchments out one by one, Elias's records, the copied fragments of the containment agreement, her own careful notes. "This is not speculation," Mira said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "It's a pattern. And it's escalating." McGonagall's lips pressed together as she read. When she finally looked up, her eyes were sharp enough to cut. "You understand what you're accusing," she said. "Yes," Mira replied. "And I understand why no one wants to believe it." McGonagall stood, moving to the window. For a long moment, she said nothing. "Hagrid has protected this school," she said quietly. "At great personal cost. He's decided who that cost belongs to," Mira said. "Without consent." McGonagall turned back to her. "If I take this to the headmaster, and you are wrong, then I'm expelled," Mira finished. "I know. And if you are right," McGonagall said, voice lowering, "people will die when his system collapses." Mira swallowed. "They're dying already." Silence stretched between them. Finally, McGonagall reached for a sealed scroll on her desk. "I will raise this," she said. Carefully. Relief nearly buckled Mira's knees. "But you will do nothing further," McGonagall added sharply. "Do you understand me?" Mira nodded. She left the office with her heart pounding, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to hope. The answer came faster than it should have. That night, the bells rang again. Not alarms. Evacuation bells. Students were rushed from common rooms, herded into the Great Hall under tight supervision. Professors shouted instructions over rising panic. The castle lights dimmed, then flared brighter than Mira had ever seen them. The forest roared. Not with sound, but with magic. It pressed against the wards like a tide, testing them. Branches slammed against invisible barriers. Shadows twisted unnaturally at the tree line. Mira felt it in her chest. "This is him," she whispered. Elias found her near the entrance, his face pale. "He's breaking a boundary." "Which one?" Elias shook his head. "An old one. One he promised never to touch." A scream cut through the chaos. Not from a student. From a professor. A massive impact shook the ground. The wards flared violently, sparks raining down like dying stars. A section of the barrier near the greenhouses flickered. And held. Barely. Hagrid stood just beyond the line. Lantern raised. Commanding. The forest answered him in waves, creatures shifting in the darkness, restless and restrained by his presence alone. Dumbledore appeared at the front steps, robes billowing in the wind conjured by failing magic. "Hagrid," he called. "Enough." Hagrid didn't turn. "They're scared," Hagrid said, voice carrying unnaturally far. "And scared people break things they don't understand." "You are threatening the school," Dumbledore said. "I'm reminding it," Hagrid replied. "Of what I hold back." Mira pushed forward before Elias could stop her. "This ends now," she shouted. Hagrid turned then. His eyes met hers across the ward line. Sad. Resolute. "I told ye," he said gently. "Truth comes with a body count." "You're making that choice," Mira said. "Not the forest. Not the creatures. You." Hagrid's grip tightened on the lantern. "For years," he said, "I've carried this so no one else had to. And now ye want to tear it down without asking what replaces it." McGonagall stepped beside Dumbledore. "Stand down, Hagrid." For the first time, he hesitated. The forest surged again, sensing uncertainty. A ward collapsed. Students screamed. Hagrid reacted instantly, raising the lantern higher, forcing the forest back with sheer will and magic bound into the land itself. He stabilized it. Saved them. Again. When the ground stilled, silence fell heavy and absolute. Dumbledore's voice was quiet when he spoke. "You have proven her point." Hagrid looked at him slowly. "You knew," Hagrid said. "I suspected," Dumbledore replied. "I hoped I was wrong." Hagrid's shoulders sagged. "Not in defeat. In disappointment." "I won't be caged," Hagrid said softly. "And I won't stop." Auras appeared at the gates, summoned too late to prevent the damage, but not too late to choose a side. Wands rose. Hagrid looked at Mira one last time. "I meant what I said," he told her. "There's no gentle ending to this." Then he stepped back into the forest. And for the first time in centuries, the Forbidden Forest did not obey. The forest did not erupt. That was what frightened them most. Morning came with an unnatural calm, the kind that made sound feel intrusive. The Forbidden Forest stood exactly as it always had, dark, dense, unmoving, but everyone who looked at it felt the difference, like a held breath that had gone on too long. Hagrid had not returned. Auras ringed the grounds. Professors took shifts at the ward anchors. Dumbledore remained awake through the night, his presence a quiet gravity at the heart of the castle. And still, nothing happened. Until it did. The first sign was small. A bowtruckle nest appeared in the Transfiguration courtyard, wrapped carefully around a stone pillar as if it had always belonged there. No one was hurt. A professor relocated it gently. Students laughed nervously. Then a herd of thestrals landed on the Quidditch pitch at dawn, wings folding in unison, eyes gleaming with calm intelligence as they refused to move for hours. Practices were cancelled. The Daily Prophet printed photographs. "Strange behavior from forest creatures," the headline read. By the third day, laughter stopped. A centaur patrol emerged from the forest without warning, arrows notched, demanding an audience with the headmaster. They spoke of borders dissolving. Of old agreements broken. Of a keeper who had gone silent. He was the voice that balanced the old blood, their leader said. Without him, the forest listens only to itself. Mira watched from the edge of the Great Hall as Dumbledore negotiated, his tone careful, respectful, strained. She could see it now, the way authority had quietly rested on Hagrid's shoulders for decades without anyone admitting it. They hadn't removed a threat. They had removed a keystone. Elias found her that evening near the window overlooking the grounds. "You see it too," he said. Mira nodded. He was holding it together. He was deciding how it stayed together, Elias corrected. "There's a difference." She leaned her forehead against the cold glass. "If we don't stop him, he'll force them to bring him back. And if we do," Elias said quietly, "this place may not survive the adjustment." Below them, a professor hurried across the lawn, wand raised as a shape moved just beyond the tree line. It retreated when the wards flared. Barely. That night, the castle shook. Not violently. Not enough to collapse stone or shatter glass. Enough to wake everyone. The tremor rolled through the foundations like a distant growl. Candles guttered. Portraits fell silent mid-complaint. Then the scream came, from the greenhouses. Mira ran. She reached the grounds just as Professor Sprout staggered back, face pale, robes torn. The soil turned, Sprout gasped. Like it rejected us. Roots had burst upward through the glass floors, thick and deliberate, snapping panes and dragging benches into the earth. A plant, ancient and aggressive, coiled itself protectively around the heart of the greenhouse, responding not to sunlight or water, but to territory. This wasn't random. It was reclamation. Dumbledore arrived moments later, eyes dark. "This is escalation," he said. "No," Mira replied, surprising herself with how steady her voice was. "This is what happens when you remove a dictator and don't replace the system." Dumbledore looked at her then, not as a student, but as a strategist. "What do you propose?" he asked. Mira swallowed. "We don't bring him back. But we don't hunt him blindly either." Elias stepped forward. "We force him into the open, away from the forest." Dumbledore frowned. "How?" Mira met his gaze. "You give him something he can't ignore." The message went out at dawn. Not by owl. By silence. The wards along the eastern edge of the forest, the oldest ones, the ones Elias had helped reinforce long ago, were lowered. Not shattered. Not weakened. Lowered. A clear invitation. The centaurs noticed immediately. So did the creatures. Movement rippled through the trees, restless and uncertain. And somewhere deep within the forest, Hagrid felt it. Mira stood at the edge of the grounds, heart pounding, as the fog began to roll in. The lantern light appeared slowly this time, no longer confident, no longer commanding, just present. Hagrid emerged from the mist alone. He looked exhausted. Not defeated. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said quietly. "You taught us how," Mira replied. Hagrid's eyes flicked to Dumbledore, to the auras, to the watching professors. Then back to her. "They'll never understand," he said. "They don't have to," Mira said. "They just have to stop letting you choose." Hagrid's jaw tightened. "And when the forest decides for itself? Then we face that truth together," she said. "Instead of pretending one man should carry it." For a moment, the forest surged behind him, shadows pressing forward. Hagrid lifted his lantern. The surge stopped. Even now, it obeyed him. "You see?" he said softly. "They still listen." "Yes," Mira said. "And that's exactly why this ends tonight." Hagrid looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, he lowered the lantern. And the forest did not surge again. It waited. The lantern's flame wavered. Mira saw it before anyone else did, the brief, telling flicker that betrayed uncertainty. Hagrid stood between the grounds and the forest like a man straddling two eras, his broad shoulders slumped under a weight that no longer obeyed him. "You shouldn't have lowered that ward," he said quietly. "We shouldn't have needed it," Dumbledore replied. The fog thickened, curling around Hagrid's boots. From within it came movement, not rushing, not attacking, but circling. Shapes slid between trunks. Eyes opened and closed like thoughts. "They're listening," Hagrid said. "But they're listening to more than me now." A low sound rolled through the trees. Not a roar. A consensus. Mira felt the ground tremble, subtle but certain, like a breath taken by something enormous. "What do they want?" she asked. Hagrid didn't answer at first. His gaze tracked the shifting dark, jaw tight. "They want what they were promised," he said finally. "Space. Silence. And payment." Elias stepped forward. "You don't get to decide that anymore." Hagrid's eyes snapped to him. "And who does? You?" "No," Elias said. No one. That word landed harder than any spell. The forest reacted immediately. Branches bent inward. Roots rose, slow and deliberate, tearing through turf and stone alike. The air filled with the smell of wet earth and old magic. A ward near the eastern edge sputtered and died. Aurors raised their wands. Hold, Dumbledore commanded. Hagrid lifted his lantern high, arms shaking with effort. The flame flared bright, casting long shadows that seemed to hesitate, uncertain. For decades, Hagrid said, voice carrying across the grounds, I gave 'em rules. Gave 'em limits. Gave 'em offerings so they wouldn't take at random. And you taught them to wait, Mira said. Not to choose. The forest surged again, closer this time. A shape broke free from the fog, a towering figure with bark-thick limbs and eyes like embers buried deep in wood. It did not attack. It knelt. The centaurs emerged behind it, bows lowered but not at rest. He speaks for the old balance, one of them said, voice echoing strangely. But the balance has shifted. Hagrid's breath came shallow. I can fix this. No, Mira said. You can only delay it. A scream erupted from the far side of the grounds. Students. A ward collapsed completely, the boundary tearing open like fabric under strain. Creatures spilled through, not in a frenzy, but in a purposeful flow, moving toward the castle's edge, testing, probing. Now! Dumbledore shouted. Spells flew, not lethal, but firm, containment charms, barriers, light and sound meant to herd rather than destroy. The grounds became a battlefield of restraint and restraint alone. Hagrid hesitated. In that hesitation, the forest chose. A massive shadow lunged, not at the students, but at the lantern. Mira saw it in slow motion, the arc of claws, the shatter of glass, the flame extinguishing in a burst of sparks. Hagrid cried out, not in pain, but in loss. The forest roared. Not with rage. With freedom. Creatures surged forward, no longer waiting for instruction. The centaurs split, some holding the line, others retreating into the trees as if the argument among them had ended. Hagrid. Dumbledore called. Stand down. Hagrid stood frozen, hands empty, staring at the broken lantern at his feet. I held him back, he whispered. I always did. And now you can help us hold them together, Mira shouted over the chaos. Or you can keep pretending this was yours to carry alone. Hagrid looked up. For the first time, fear stripped the certainty from his face. He turned toward the castle, toward the students huddled behind shimmering shields, toward the professors straining to maintain them. Then he turned back to the forest. And stepped forward. The creatures paused. Not because he commanded them. Because he offered himself. I won't run, Hagrid said, voice hoarse. I won't hide behind bargains any more. He spread his arms wide. If it's a reckoning ye want, he said to the dark, then take it from me. The ground buckled beneath him. Roots surged upward, wrapping around his legs, his waist, his arms. Not crushing. Binding. Claiming. Hagrid. Mira screamed. He met her eyes, something like peace settling over his features. Tell him, he said softly. Tell him I was wrong. The forest pulled him back, step by inexorable step, until the fog swallowed him whole. The surge stopped. Creatures retreated, slowly, reluctantly, back into the trees. The broken ward sealed itself imperfectly, like a scar that would never quite heal. Silence fell. Not relief. Aftermath. They found the lantern later. Crushed. Blackened. Empty. They did not find Hagrid. Hogwarts did not celebrate. There were no speeches. No candles lifted in unison. No careful framing of the night's events as a victory. The castle woke the next morning like a body after trauma, intact, functional, and deeply changed. The eastern grounds remained closed. A jagged line in the earth marked where the ward had torn and re-knit itself imperfectly. Professors moved through corridors with quiet urgency, faces drawn, voices low. Students whispered instead of laughed. And Hagrid's hut stood empty. Mira watched from the steps of the great hall as the sun rose behind the towers. The light felt wrong, too clean for what it touched. She kept expecting to see him lumber across the lawn, kettle in hand, muttering about breakfast and work and foolish kids. He did not come. No one said his name aloud. The truth arrived by parchment. Dumbledore summoned the heads of house, the board of governors, and the Aurors who had witnessed the breach. Elias was there too, standing stiffly at the back of the room like a man bracing for a storm he had once survived. Mira was not invited. She listened anyway. The doors to the council chamber were thick, but they had never been built to keep out guilt. Voices rose and fell. Arguments sharpened, then dulled. At one point, something shattered, a glass, a spell, a carefully maintained illusion. By evening, the story had been rewritten. Not erased. Rewritten. A notice appeared in every common room. In light of recent events, Hogwarts acknowledges that long-standing containment practices within the Forbidden Forest were improperly managed. Improperly managed. Mira read the words again and again, each time feeling the same hollow ache. The notice continued. Rubeus Hagrid acted beyond the authority granted to him, resulting in loss of life and endangerment to students. Loss of life. Plural. No names. No dates. No apologies. But the lie, that it had all been accidents, was gone. That mattered. Some students cried when they read it. Others raged. A few sat in stunned silence, the truth rearranging memories they had cherished. Mira folded the parchment carefully and slipped it into her bag. Elias found her by the lake at dusk. "They're calling it a systemic failure," he said. "Is it?" Mira asked. "Yes," Elias replied. "And no." They stood together, watching the water ripple gently against the shore. Thestrals grazed nearby, calm now, their wings folded neatly at their sides. "The forest hasn't attacked again," Mira said. "It won't," Elias replied. "Not like before. It's learning." She shivered. "That's not comforting. It's honest." Mira swallowed. "They're going to dismantle what he built." Elias nodded. Slowly. Carefully. With more oversight than one person should ever have had. "And the cost?" Elias didn't answer right away. "Some creatures won't accept it," he said finally. "Some already haven't. There will be incidents. Injuries. Maybe deaths." Mira closed her eyes. So he was right. Elias shook his head. He was useful. That's not the same thing. The funeral came 3 days later. Not for Hagrid. For Callum. And for the others whose names had been recovered from records, margins, and memories that had been forced to remember them at last. The ceremony was quiet. Personal. Professors spoke each name aloud, one by one, refusing to rush through the list. Parents sat in the front rows, some grieving anew, others discovering the truth for the first time. Mira stood at the back, heart pounding with every name spoken. When Callum's name echoed through the grounds, she felt something inside her finally crack. Afterward, as people drifted away in small, fragile groups, Dumbledore approached her. "You did the right thing," he said. Mira met his eyes. "Did I?" He hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. "There was no right ending," Dumbledore said quietly. "Only necessary ones." Mira thought of the lantern breaking. Of roots binding Hagrid as he vanished into the forest. "I don't believe in necessary sacrifices anymore," she said. Dumbledore bowed his head. Nor should you. That night, Mira returned to the edge of the grounds alone. The forest watched her. She could feel it now, not as a threat, but as a presence aware of being seen without a keeper to mediate the gaze. The fog curled at her feet, cautious. I didn't want it to end like that, she whispered. The forest did not answer. But something shifted. A branch bent. Leaves rustled. Not in accusation. In acknowledgement. Mira stepped back, heart heavy. The forest would never forget Hagrid. And neither would she. The first incident happened a week after the funeral. It was small enough that the castle tried to swallow it. A third year was found unconscious near the greenhouses at dawn, one snapped clean and two, robes shredded at the hem. No one saw what did it. No creature was captured. By breakfast, the story had already softened. Probably a frightened animal. Probably a one-off. Probably nothing like before. Mira heard the whispers and felt the lie reforming itself. Different words. Same instinct. The new system arrived in pieces. Committees were formed. Rotations assigned. Charts drawn and redrawn as professors debated territory, migration patterns, ancient agreements none of them truly understood. The forest did not care about their parchment. It responded to presence. To hesitation. To mistakes. Mira spent her evenings in the library with Elias, cross-checking incident reports against old records. The parallels were unsettling, not in scale, but in shape. Where Hagrid's system had been deliberate and controlled, this one was fragmented, reactive. They're treating it like a problem to solve, Mira said, rubbing her eyes. Not a relationship to manage. Elias nodded. Hagrid understood that part. He just decided control was the only language it respected. And now? Now it's deciding whether we deserve patience. The second incident made the Daily Prophet. A group of fifth years ignored the new boundary markers, temporary, imperfect things, and wandered too close to a nesting site the centaurs had claimed after the ward collapse. No one died. 2 students were injured badly enough to be sent to St. Mungo's. The headline read, Hogwarts safety in question. Mira crumpled the paper. They'll use this, she said. Of course they will, Elias replied. Fear always wants a manager. She looked up at him sharply. You don't think they'll ask whether Hagrid should have been stopped, Elias finished. Or whether he should have been supervised. Mira felt something twist in her chest. That's not the same as justice. No, Elias said. But it's easier. Dumbledore summoned her that evening. His office felt heavier than before, as if the room itself remembered what had been decided there over decades. The portraits were quiet. The phoenix slept, feathers barely stirring. You've seen the reports, Dumbledore said. Yes. You've seen the injuries. Yes. He studied her carefully. Do you still believe this was the right course? Mira didn't answer immediately. She thought of Callum. Of the list in the margins. Of Hagrid stepping into the forest and not returning. I believe it was the only honest one, she said finally. Dumbledore nodded slowly. Honesty has consequences. So does silence. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. You sound older than you were. I feel it. He sighed. There are members of the board who believe the forest needs a singular authority again. Mira's breath caught. You mean, not Hagrid, Dumbledore said quickly. That path is closed. But someone like him. Someone willing to decide. Mira shook her head. That's how this started. Yes, Dumbledore agreed. And it's how many systems persist. Silence stretched. What would you do? He asked. Mira met his gaze. I would refuse the comfort of one person holding the burden. And I would accept that safety will be messier. Dumbledore leaned back, eyes distant. That is not a popular answer. It isn't meant to be. The forest tested them again that night. Not with force. With proximity. A massive shape appeared just beyond the walls near Ravenclaw Tower, close enough that students could see it from their windows. It did not cross the line. It simply stood there, breathing slowly, its presence heavy and unmistakable. Fear rippled through the castle. Auras arrived within minutes. Professors raised layered defenses. Spells shimmered in the air like held breath. Mira stood among them, heart pounding. "It's waiting," someone whispered. "For what?" another replied. Mira understood then. It was waiting to see who would speak. No lantern rose. No commanding voice cut through the tension. Instead, Professor Sprout stepped forward, hands empty, posture calm. She spoke, not in the language of spells, but in the low, careful tones Hagrid had once used. The creature listened. Not obeyed. Listened. After a long, unbearable minute, it turned and melted back into the trees. The wards held. The castle exhaled. Mira felt tears sting her eyes, not from relief, but from grief. This was harder. This was slower. This was what Hagrid had refused to believe anyone else could do. Later, alone by the window, Mira whispered into the dark. "We're learning." The forest rustled softly. Not approval. Not rejection. Acknowledgement. The failure came quietly. No alarms. No screams. No shattered wards. Just absence. A seventh-year prefect named Rowan Vale did not return from patrol. By the time the notice reached the staff room, the sun was already high, the castle fully awake, students moving through corridors with the easy confidence of a place that had survived worse. Mira felt the words land in her chest like a weight. Missing. Not injured. Not unconscious. Missing. The search began immediately, coordinated, methodical, restrained in all the ways Hagrid's had never been. Professors paired off. Auras traced boundaries. Centaurs were consulted, not commanded. The forest did not resist. It simply did not answer. They found Rowan near dusk. Alive. Barely. He lay in a shallow ravine where the trees grew close together, his body wrapped in thick vines that pulsed faintly with magic. Not restraining him. Sustaining him. His breathing was shallow, his skin cold, his eyes unfocused but aware. Professor Sprout knelt first, hands shaking as she began counter-charms. "This isn't predation," she whispered. "It's preservation." Mira swallowed hard. They carried Rowan back on a conjured stretcher, silence following them like a shadow. The castle doors closed behind them with a sound that felt final. At St. Mungo's, healers worked through the night. Rowan survived. He would walk again. He would remember everything. That was what frightened them most. The meeting that followed was not a council. It was an argument. "This proves the forest can be reasoned with," one governor insisted. "This proves we're gambling with children," another snapped. "We need a central authority. We need restraint. We need someone willing to decide." Mira stood at the back, listening, recognizing the familiar shape of the debate. Fear sharpening into certainty. Uncertainty hardening into a demand for control. Elias leaned close. "They're circling the same conclusion." She nodded. "Without saying his name?" "They won't bring him back," Elias said. "But they'll make another." The room fell quiet as Dumbledore spoke. "There will be no new keeper," he said. The words landed like a dropped plate. "We will not replace one quiet tyranny with another," he continued. "We will accept a shared burden, even when it frightens us." A governor scoffed. "And when another student is lost?" Dumbledore's gaze did not waver. "Then we will answer for it," openly. Not by hiding it in the forest. Eyes turned to Mira. Not accusing. Considering. She felt it then, the pull. The same gravity that had drawn responsibility toward Hagrid when everyone else looked away. Mira, McGonagall said carefully, you understand the forest. You've listened. Mira's heart thudded. Listening isn't control. No, McGonagall agreed. But it's a start. Mira took a breath. If you make me a keeper, she said, you will be repeating the mistake. Silence. I'll help, she continued. I'll advise. I'll teach others how to listen. But I won't decide who pays for safety. Elias watched her with something like pride and fear. The governors murmured, displeased, uncertain. Dumbledore nodded once. Then that is the path. Not chosen. Accepted. That night, Mira went to the forest alone. Not in defiance. In honesty. She stopped at the scar where the ward had torn and healed imperfectly, the place where Hagrid had disappeared. The air felt different there, less heavy, less obedient. I won't bargain, she said softly. And I won't command. The forest shifted, leaves rustling like a long exhale. I won't offer bodies, she continued. But I will offer presence. And patience. Something moved in the dark. Not closer. Not away. Present. Mira felt fear rise, and let it stay. I know what you took from him, she said. And what he took from us. The forest did not deny it. I'm not him, she whispered. And I won't become him. For a moment, just a moment, she felt something like balance. Not enforced. Not promised. Shared. When she turned back toward the castle, the trees did not follow. They watched. Rowan woke the next morning. His first words were not of terror. He told me to stay still, Rowan said hoarsely. Said if I fought, I'd be hurt. Said the forest was learning. Who told you? The healer asked gently. Rowan hesitated. I don't know. Not a voice. More like a memory. Mira felt a chill. The forest remembered. And it was changing. The story leaked before the truth could settle. It always did. By the end of the week, the Daily Prophet had found its angle, not the forest learning, not the dismantling of a hidden tyranny, but the shape of a replacement myth. Hogwarts finds a new voice for the forest. Mira's name appeared twice. By the second edition, it appeared in the headline. She felt it the moment she stepped into the great hall, eyes lingering too long, whispers stopping mid-sentence, the subtle shift that came when people decided you were no longer just a person, but an answer. Or a threat. She talks to it, someone murmured near the doors. She went out there alone, another whispered. She's the reason it didn't kill that prefect. Mira ate little. The food tasted distant, like it belonged to another life. Elias found her afterward, his jaw tight. They're turning you into a symbol. I didn't agree to that. No one ever does. The pressure came next. Parents wrote letters. Governors demanded statements. Auras asked questions that weren't really questions. Even well-meaning professors framed their concerns as suggestions Mira was expected to solve. How would you handle this boundary? What does the forest want here? Would you be willing to accompany patrols? Mira answered carefully. Repeatedly. She emphasized what she had always said, that there would be no single voice, no keeper, no authority concentrated in one pair of hands. But fear heard only what it wanted. Fear wanted a face. The forest noticed. It began with small refusals. Paths that had remained open for weeks became impassable overnight, vines thickening in deliberate knots. Creatures that had tolerated observation withdrew completely. The centaurs sent a message, brief and cold. Do not name what does not consent. Mira read it twice. They're reacting to the attention, she said to Elias that night. They're reacting to ownership, Elias replied. You're being treated like a handle. She pressed her palms into her eyes. I won't do this again. I won't become him. Then you'll have to break the story they're telling, Elias said. How? Publicly. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. A delegation of governors demanded a demonstration. Not in those words, of course. They framed it as reassurance. Transparency. Proof that the new approach worked. We'd like Miss Mira to accompany us to the eastern boundary, one said smoothly. To explain how communication occurs. Mira felt the trap close. If I go, she said quietly to Dumbledore later, they'll believe I'm the solution. And if you don't, Dumbledore replied, they'll believe you're hiding something. She met his gaze. Then I'll go. But not the way they expect. They gathered at dusk. Lanterns ringed the boundary, not to command, but to watch. Governors stood stiffly, robes immaculate. Auras waited, wands lowered but ready. Reporters hovered at the edge, quills twitching. Mira stepped forward alone. No wand raised. No script prepared. I'm not here to speak for the forest, she said clearly. And I won't demonstrate control. Murmurs rippled through the group. I'm here to demonstrate refusal, she continued. Mine. And yours. She turned toward the trees. The forest was quiet. Not receptive. Not hostile. Waiting. You don't owe us clarity, Mira said. And we don't owe you silence. But we will stop pretending that safety comes from one person deciding who is expendable. A governor scoffed. This is meaningless. Then watch, Mira replied. She stepped back. And did nothing. Minutes passed. The forest shifted, not toward them, but away. The air eased. The tension drained like water from cupped hands. No miracle. No spectacle. Just absence of violence. Mira turned back to the governors. That's it. That's the work. It doesn't look like power. Some looked disappointed. Others looked afraid. A few looked thoughtful. That night, the forest pushed back. Not against Hogwarts. Against Mira. She felt it as she walked the grounds, a pressure, not aggressive, but insistent. The sense of being observed sharpened until it became unavoidable. She stopped at the tree line. I know, she said softly. I know they're trying to make me something you recognize. The forest stirred. I won't accept it, she said. And I won't speak over you. For the first time since Hagrid's disappearance, something like anger rippled through the trees, not violent, but sharp. Leaves shook. Branches bent. Not rejection. Challenge. Mira stood her ground, heart racing. I'm not your keeper, she whispered. And I won't be your shield. The pressure eased. The forest did not retreat. It acknowledged her boundary. When Mira finally turned back toward the castle, she understood something that both terrified and steadied her. The forest was not testing whether she could replace Hagrid. It was testing whether humans could finally stop trying. The final crisis did not announce itself. There were no headlines. No alarms. No roar from the forest. It began with a decision made by several people at once. And that, Mira would later realize, was the point. The wards failed just before dawn. Not all of them. Not catastrophically. A sequence, subtle, cascading, like fingers slipping from a fraying rope. The eastern scar widened. Then the southern boundary thinned. Not enough to invite invasion. Enough to invite choice. Creatures crossed. Not in panic. Not in force. They moved in ones and twos, testing, observing, curious in the way predators are curious when they do not yet know the rules of a new place. A manticore cub appeared near the boathouse and vanished again. A knot of roots split the stone path leading to the greenhouses. Something winged circled the astronomy tower and perched, watching the sky lighten. The castle woke into uncertainty. Auras moved to respond, and stopped. Because there was no single command. No lantern raised. No voice to cut through hesitation and decide for everyone else. For the first time, Hogwarts had to act like a community instead of a system. Mira was pulled into motion before she could think. Not summoned. Asked. Professor Sprout took the greenhouses with a group of students trained in herbology, not to drive anything away, but to mark reclaimed soil and step back. Flitwick coordinated layered charms that guided rather than blocked. McGonagall assigned prefects to escort younger students, no heroics, no lone patrols. Elias stood beside Mira near the southern grounds, breath misting in the cold. "This is the moment," he said quietly, "where they decide whether fear rules again." A shape emerged from the trees. Large. Deliberate. Not aggressive. It stopped 10 paces from the ward line and waited. Mira felt the instinct surge, to step forward, to speak, to become the voice everyone wanted her to be. She didn't. She looked around instead. And saw people watching each other. Waiting. Learning. Professor Sprout raised a hand, not a wand. Others mirrored the gesture. Slowly. Unevenly. Human and imperfect. The creature tilted its head. Then turned away. A breath released across the grounds. But the forest wasn't finished. The scream came from the western edge. Elias moved before Mira could stop him. He'd always been quicker to act than to wait. Quicker to bear consequences than to let them linger. By the time Mira reached the place where the trees thinned, Elias was already there, standing between a student and a low, coiling mass of living with that pulsed with magic too old to name. "It's not hostile," he said over his shoulder. "It's confused." The student froze, terror locking her in place. Mira felt the ground shift. This was the moment Hagrid would have decided. This was the moment someone would have been chosen. "Elias," Mira said, voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. "Step back." He didn't. "It needs a boundary," he said. "A person." "No," Mira replied. "It needs space." The forest surged. Roots lashed, not violently, but with intent, cutting off retreat, tightening the space until there were only 2 options left. Elias made his choice. He stepped forward, arms out, body angled away from the student. "Go," he said softly. Mira screamed his name. The roots wrapped him, not crushing, not tearing, but binding, lifting, pulling him into the tree line with relentless patience. The student collapsed, sobbing. The forest retreated. Not all at once. Just enough. They found Elias alive. Hours later. Entwined with roots that had begun to grow through him, sustaining and consuming in equal measure. He was conscious. Fading. Smiling faintly when Mira reached him. "Looks like I finally paid," he murmured. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "Yes," he said gently. "I did. So you wouldn't." He died before dawn. The forest did not take another step that day. The cost was undeniable. The board met again. Parents demanded answers again. The prophet printed another headline again. But something had shifted. No one suggested a new keeper. No one asked Mira to stand at the boundary again. They mourned Elias publicly. Named him. Named what he had done. Not an accident. A choice. The forest remained unstable, but quieter. More cautious. As if it, too, had learned the weight of a human boundary freely offered. Mira returned to the scar one last time that evening. "I won't do this your way," she said softly into the trees. "And I won't let them do it mine." The forest did not argue. It did not agree. It listened. Years later, people would argue about when it truly ended. Some said it ended the night Hagrid vanished into the forest, lantern shattered, authority broken. Others said it ended with Elias's death, when the cost of refusing control could no longer be debated in theory. Mira knew better. It ended slowly. It ended in meetings that ran too long and decisions that satisfied no one. It ended in scars left unhealed on the grounds and lessons rewritten without tidy conclusions. It ended in a Hogwarts that no longer pretended safety was effortless. The forest did not retreat. But it changed. So did they. The eastern scar never fully closed. Students learned to recognize it the way sailors learned reefs, by memory, by caution, by respect rather than fear. The wards were rebuilt differently this time, layered, shared, imperfect by design. No single person held the keys. Incidents still happened. Creatures wandered too close. Students made foolish choices. Injuries occurred. Sometimes deaths, though fewer than before, and never unnamed. Each one was recorded. Each one was mourned. No margins. No quiet lists. The forest responded in kind, not kinder, not crueler, but attentive. As if it understood, at last, that no one voice would bargain for it again. Hagrid's hut remained empty. At first, no one dared enter it. Then, gradually, it became something else, a place of instruction rather than authority. Students learned about creatures there, not as threats or tools, but as presences with needs that could not always be negotiated. On the wall above the old hearth, a plaque was mounted. It did not praise him. It did not condemn him. It read, "Rubius Hagrid held back what the world was not ready to face. He was necessary. He was wrong." Some students hated it. Some found comfort in it. Mira insisted it remain unchanged. She did not become a keeper. She became something quieter. A teacher. She taught listening, not as submission, not as control, but as practice. She taught boundaries that did not depend on sacrifice and courage that did not demand bodies in exchange. When students asked about Hagrid, she told them the truth. All of it. "He believed kindness justified his choices," she said. "And he believed being alone made him strong." "Was he evil?" someone asked once. Mira thought of the lantern, the forest, the way he had stepped forward when the reckoning came. "No," she said. "He was certain." They learned to fear certainty more than monsters. The forest remembered. Sometimes, on still nights, Mira would feel it watching, not with hunger, not with threat, but with the patience of something ancient that had outlasted every argument made about it. Once, long after the scars had faded and the lessons had hardened into habit, she walked to the tree line alone. "I won't thank you," she said quietly. "And I won't apologize." The leaves rustled softly. "That's fair," she whispered. She turned back toward the castle. History would smooth the story, as it always did. Textbooks would reduce it to paragraphs. Arguments would resurface whenever fear grew loud enough. Someone, someday, would suggest again that one person should decide for everyone else. And someone else would point to the forest. To the names that had been spoken aloud. To the cost paid when control was mistaken for care. Hagrid's crimes were never just his. They were the crimes of a system that asked one man to be a wall, then blamed him for casting a shadow. The bitter irony remained, the system was necessary. The silence was not. And Hogwarts, wiser, quieter, and far less comfortable, endured anyway.